Thanks for coming. We knew today many people were leaving the city, but I can tell you, attending today's lecture is way more interesting than dealing with a traffic jam outside from Barcelona, so thanks for coming. As you know, Catalans Lliures is an independent, non-partisan think tank founded by members of civil society. We are a private organization, and our goal is to introduce the liberal view in the public opinion. And to do so, we organize lectures, panels, debates. We publish articles and reports, and we try to enhance better public policy through building coalitions with academia, policymakers, and citizens. Our funding principles are the recognition of pluralism, the exercise of tolerance, the defense of civil rights and individual liberties, and the promotion of inclusive governance, open societies, and the free market economy. Today, we are extremely fortunate to have with us Professor McCloskey. She's a distinguished professor of economics, history, English, and communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and was a visiting professor, a visiting Tinbergen professor of philosophy and economics at the University of Rotterdam. She earned her PhD in economics at Harvard and taught for about 12 years in economics at the University of Chicago, sharing department with Professor Milton Friedman. She has received 6 honorary doctorates.
10, actually.
10? Okay. 10? Thank you. Even better. Written more than 20 books and around 400 articles that range from economics and statistical theory to philosophy, ethics, and transgender advocacy. Her book, The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce, is the first of a trilogy of 3 magnificent books. I recommend you the 3 of them very much. And, well, we as liberals have often lacked this historical understanding or perspective that reinforces our ideas and a better appreciation of the bourgeois era. And therefore, I think today it will be a great pleasure to hear you. So, without any further ado, Professor, the floor is yours, and please enjoy the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I have a terrible, terrible cold. Every time I come to Europe, I get a cold because I shake hands with people, like my friends here down the front, and then I put it up to my nose and I get a cold. So it would be quite offensive to shake hands with my friends and immediately go wash my hands. So I have a cold, so I apologize. I'm extremely pleased to be back here in Barcelona. I've been to Barcelona, 6, 7, maybe 8 times, and every time I come here, it looks better. It looks terrific now. It's a jewel, and indeed, imagine what the world's cities would look like if Gaudí had not stepped in front of a tram in the 1920s. And instead of having these modernist buildings, glass boxes, we had Gaudí's architecture worldwide. It would look beautiful, my God. I'm going to argue this evening that the way forward is liberalism, in the sense that classical, by the way, I have a speech defect as well. I'll try to speak slowly, which will help my speech defect, and will also help you follow my English. By liberalism, I mean the liberalism of the 19th century, of the 1800s. John Stuart Mill, Adam Smith. I always cross myself when I mention Adam Smith. That is, as Adam Smith described it, the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice. That was what he wanted for a society and an economy. Equality, liberty, and justice. But you have to read Adam Smith to be clear what he meant by each of those. By equality, he did not mean equality of sort of result, of outcome, of incomes. He meant equality of opportunity, as we often say. He meant that the poor Scottish peasant should have a chance. And then by liberty, he meant economic liberty. The right to start a hairdressing salon, which I desperately need right now. But it's too late. I'm talking, my hair is going crazy. If you want to, where you want to. I was told this afternoon that there's a movement. Is it in London? The NIMBY means not in my backyard, and is one of the main obstacles to progress in the world these days. But there's a movement now, YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. So we're going to, if YIMBY becomes important, maybe London will stop being so expensive because more houses will be built. So that's the liberty part. And justice means equal justice before the law. And notice that in Adam Smith's, I got to cross myself again, I should stop mentioning it. In Adam Smith's way of thinking, this is in his book of, well, he wrote only 2 books, The Theory of Moral Sentiments in 1759 and The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So this is early stuff. And he was recommending a new liberalism, a new equality. The key word in all his thinking is equality. If you haven't read Adam Smith, you might think, oh, well, he was a conservative and he wanted the working class to be quiet and accept their place in society. That wasn't his attitude at all. He was, pardon me, I'll occasionally do quite disgusting sneezing and blowing my nose and so on. I'm sorry, I can't help it. But he was deeply egalitarian. He viewed you and you and you and you as spiritually, so to speak, equal, as people who should be allowed to be able to try out things, to start that hairdressing salon. And when they went to law, when they came before a court, they were to be treated like a lord. Everyone was to be treated the same way. Now this, in the 1700s, was a very radical idea. In earlier centuries, people regarded such equality as completely local, completely crazy. What do you mean? A duke is equal to a plowman, or a plowman is equal to a duke? Don't be ridiculous. When Charles I, the King of England, was executed in 1649 in January, he said from the scaffold, "Don't you understand? A sovereign, that is a king, and a subject are clean different things." Now it's that hierarchy that Adam Smith was against and that liberals are against. And this is true down to the present. Now, unfortunately, the word liberal has come to mean socialist, which is very irritating. The great economist Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, said the socialists liked the word liberal so much that they took it over and made it into socialism. Because their equality is equality of result, of outcome. Not equality of having a chance, having equality of opportunity. And my claim, I'm going to go sit down because I'm so sick and I'm old too. I'm 75 years old. What's the correct answer? Good. That's right. Just appealing for sympathy. My claim is that we're rich because of liberalism. We're rich because this new idea in the 1700s that you're all equal and you all get a chance grew, spread. It started in Holland in the earlier, and then it moved to England, Scotland, the North American colonies, the English colonies, and then it spread everywhere. In fact, Spain had a very liberal constitution in the early 1800s. Spain was way ahead of most of Europe in this connection. And what a liberal constitution is one that really treats people as equal, not one, and this is the problem with socialism taking over the world, especially in my own country, especially in the United States. A liberal is a person of the left. And a liberal in that definition thinks it's just fine for the government to take from you to give to him. And there are a lot of troubles with that. There are a lot of problems when you start redistributing income. But in any case, my scientific point, my point that I think I can support, and I have in my 3 volumes, this is the largest one. The others are smaller. The others are only 500 pages long. This is 700 pages long. I was going to do 4 volumes, and at one point I was going to do 6. And I was going to call it a sexology and sell a lot of books. But I decided that didn't meet the test of bourgeois virtues. And then it was 4. And then I said, now wait a second. A trilogy, which is what I've written, is a little bit self-indulgent. She's going to write 3 books on this, long books. Jeez. But a tetralogy, 4 books, is an abomination. You should be stoned to death for writing 4 big books. So that's why that one's so fat. Crammed everything into it. But I think I've shown in these books a terribly important historical point. That it's this liberalism, this political and economic liberalism of the 1700s that gave so many more people a chance. First, white poor people, poor men, then slaves, former slaves, then women, then colonial people, then people of color generally, then gays, then transgendered people. I mean, it's slow, but it's a continuous expansion of who gets to play. Everyone here in a free country like Spain, or if you wish, Catalonia, is to some degree free to open a hairdressing salon or to start a business, and is to some degree equal before the law, and is to some degree equal socially. It's a value in our culture not to treat people with the kind of lofty contempt that was commonplace in the old days. In the 18th century and before, you stand aside, knave, we say in English. You know, the people high up in the hierarchy didn't believe that my ancestors and yours were worth any consideration at all. Yet now we would be ashamed to express such a feeling. Because you're supposed to treat people equally. Now we don't, alas, but you're supposed to. And my claim is that much more than any government action, much more than any intervention by the state, much more than science, for example, liberalism caused enrichment. And the way it did it is by letting people try things out, to try stuff. Before they couldn't do it, then they could. So from essentially around 1800 on, there's this fantastic explosion of new ideas, of clever ideas. Not all of them mechanical, some of them mechanical, or electric lights, central heating. These boards are cut by circular saws or by band saws that are invented in Sweden in the early 19th century. The camera, take a look at the camera. It's tiny. 30 years ago, a camera that could do that, well, it would have to have a separate sound system, and you'd be carrying it up the stairs. You wouldn't be able to get up the stairs, it'd be so big. And now we can have a camera the size of a little camera that can record me for posterity. And it's not, as I said, it's not just mechanical inventions. The germ theory of disease, the radical change from about the 1830s on in medicine, in which French doctors called themselves nihilists because they had come to be convinced that the old ways of treating people were just not working. If you got sick in the 1700s, the doctor would give you an enema, or would make you vomit. Hey, that's good. You have a bad cold? Here, drink this stuff, and you'll vomit. That'll make you better, won't it? And so this was a very crude way of dealing with people, and it didn't work. So in the 1830s, these French doctors said, we have to start over again. We have to start medicine over again on a serious basis. Eventually, that resulted in the so-called germ theory of disease and sewers to prevent human waste from being mixed with drinking water. And so it went. They haven't solved the common cold. Now, if there are any doctors here, or biologists, and there are, stop doing what you're doing and get to work on the common cold. We got to do something about this. It's misery. Anyway, so, and there were organizational innovations. Among my favorites, and there are hundreds of them, is containerization. You know what containerization is? You have it down at the port in Barcelona. Big container ships holding 8,000 containers, 8 or 10,000 containers, come from China or from wherever, India. And they're incredibly cheap to ship things. You put it in a container. The people taking the containers out can't steal from it because it's sealed. You take it out all at once. You put it on a truck, a lorry, and you send it to Salamanca or something. That's how modern transport works. And it's amazingly cheaper than what we had before. That was invented by the owner of a trucking company, I keep forgetting his name, in North Carolina in the United States in 1956. And there was no big science involved. It's, as we say in the States, it wasn't rocket science. They had steel, which was another one of the great inventions of the 1800s. And he said, well, let's make a box and put stuff in the box and send it to China. You can put cars inside these boxes if you want. So it was just an organizational idea. There wasn't anything, you didn't have to be a physicist to know how to do this. So all these inventions, invented mostly by ordinary people. This is where the science hypothesis comes in. I have a friend, another economic historian, says, no, economic growth is about science. I say to him, no, come on. Until around 1900, science really didn't have a great deal to do with the economy. Let's take a very important innovation that allows you to build very tall buildings, reinforced concrete. It was one of the tricks of Gaudi, for that matter. Reinforced concrete takes an ancient technology, it's Roman and Chinese, and it says, no wait, we have this inexpensive steel, let's put that inside the concrete. Well, you'd think, oh, well, that must have been a very sophisticated person. No, it wasn't. It was a French gardener in the 1850s, I believe, or maybe 60s, but anyway, in the middle of the 1800s. And he wanted to build big pots, right, to hold little trees. So they wanted to be really big, that big. And if you build a pot out of clay, it's mathematically obvious that it's going to break. You can build a small pot for a flower or something, but you can't build a big pot for trees unless, he said, now wait a second. He just noticed that we have these wire screens, essentially. Screening in a window, which, by the way, itself is a big innovation because it allows you to open the window without getting insects in. So it suddenly made stifling hot Barcelona summers possible to tolerate. But anyway, he took the screening and put it inside the clay. And that held it together. And you could build much bigger pots. And then some smart person said, no, wait, we can make buildings this way. We can put steel inside concrete. And then they learned to pre-stress the concrete. It makes it fancier. But basically, my building in Chicago, which was built in 1912, it was a printing plant, then made into apartments. But it's reinforced concrete. I have great, pillars in my house, in my apartment, holding up the thing. It goes up 13 stories. And now you can build it to 80 stories. So these are not scientific ideas. Eventually, science gets important. It gets to be more and more important in our lives. You can't have a cell phone without science. It doesn't have to be very fancy science, but you got to have some scientists who learn about electricity and electrons and blah, blah, blah. But up to around 1900, there'd still been a very great increase in income. And then well into the 1900s, you didn't need to be a PhD scientist to do many things. Okay, so how is this liberal? I mean, isn't it the National Science Foundation or government financing of innovation? Isn't that what happened? No, on the whole. Governments have never been very good at choosing winners. And in a way, this is completely unsurprising. Let's take a Spanish case. High-speed rail. Tomorrow, I'm going to go to Madrid on the high-speed rail. Very nice for me. Well, it takes 2.5 hours. You're there. And in the 2000s, the central government in Spain built high-speed rail all over the place. Spain has more high-speed rail than any other European country, more than France. So you're whizzing along at 300 kilometers an hour or something faster because the government thought it was a good idea. Particularly the prime minister thought it was a good idea to have a high-speed rail to his town. He thought that would be good for the country. And you can see the problem here. Why would the government be good at that? Why would the government know what the correct amount of high-speed rail is. Whereas a private investor, a bank, say, financing high-speed rail, would say, now wait a second, are you going to be able to charge a price that's going to make money so that you can pay back the loan I'm going to give you as a bank? So there's this market discipline that the private sector has that the public sector doesn't have. The Great Belt in Denmark, if I got it right, there's a bridge. The tunnel worked perfectly well. Am I correct about that? Zeeland going to the mainland of Europe, they had a tunnel. But the politicians wanted a beautiful bridge. Am I more or less correct here? So they built a beautiful bridge. They already had a way of getting to the island of Zeeland, to, what's the mainland called? Yeah, Jutland. I should know that because it juts out. But anyway, but the politicians wanted this other thing. And this isn't necessarily because I think politicians are bad. I think that's very dangerous. To talk that way about politicians being bad is to undermine democracy. So you got to be careful with sneering at every politician we meet. That's not a good idea. That way lies fascism. But mostly, you get good innovations that are worth having by someone taking a chance on a new product. Steve Jobs, the great American hero in this connection, is a case in point. Now, to mention heroism, there's a very important part of all this. That what changed between the time of, say, Shakespeare or Don Quixote, and Jane Austen, what changed between 1600 and 1800, in England at least, is that people stopped sneering at people in business. In Shakespeare's time, the only way to honor was through the court, or the battlefield, or the church. That's how you got to be a big deal, you know? And business was sneered at. Now, of course, that didn't mean that Shakespeare and his friends didn't want more money. Of course they did. It's not that they were sort of saintly and didn't want to be rich. They wanted to be rich. And Shakespeare was very good at his business of running theater companies. And he charged people to get into the Globe Theater. He made them pay. Okay? So he was a businessman. He was the son of a glover, someone who made gloves. But Shakespeare had pretensions of being more grand. And when he retired from the theater, he got himself made, or he had made a coat of arms, you know what I mean? Coat of arms, divided into four, and a lion here and that there, because he wanted to pretend that he was a member of the gentry, the upper class. Not aristocracy, he wouldn't pretend that, because that's too high, but member of the gentry. And this is crazy. If that's how you view the economy, as a disgusting, easy thing that only stupid people do, then you're going to have a very bad economy. A pretty good example of this is contemporary Russia, in which wealth is assumed to be achieved through stealing. Now, in actual fact, a lot of the big wealth in Russia is achieved through stealing. But to assume that anyone in business is a thief is a good way to have an incompetent economy that can't do things well. And on the contrary, liberalism valued these attempts, these courageous acts to start your hair salon, You put your soul into it. You work hard. We were just my friends here and I were last night we were at a restaurant close to here. Now this is on Wednesday night in Barcelona. By 10:30 we were the only people in the restaurant. And this is not good news. There were about 5 people working there. The market was telling them, and the food was okay. It wasn't wonderful, but it was okay. The market was telling them, don't do that. Go do something else. Open another kind of store if you want. Go work in a factory. Go work for Uber. Do something else. Because you're not getting people to voluntarily buy. If you do, then both of you are made better off. The person who earns the profit, the restaurant owner, and the customer. Because it's a voluntary deal. They're not being fooled all the time. Usually when it's a good restaurant, they go to it, and it's crowded at 10:30 at night. Maybe they came afterwards. Maybe these were late dining Barcelonans, but you all are, so I don't know. That didn't work so well. So that's the point. Now, there's a role for government. I don't want to be misunderstood as an anarchist, although I must say I admire the anarchist tradition in Spain, especially Barcelona. But anarchism doesn't mean nihilism. It doesn't mean bomb throwing. It means people who want a small government, competent, doing a good job on the things that a government really needs to do, like protecting Spain from being invaded by France, say, or a few other things. Enforcing, for example, vaccination. That's a clear case for forcing people to do stuff. Because if I don't get my smallpox vaccination, you get smallpox. And, you know, it's harmless, so I should get it. And if I say, oh, no, I don't want to get vaccination, then I think there's a case for the government coming with a policeman and saying, yes, dear, you must get a vaccination. And there are a few other things, informational things, that the government can do. But investing, on the one hand, and protecting, on the other, are not things, in my view, and the view of real liberals, the government should do. I've told you why I don't think the government's good at investing. It hasn't got the incentives right. But why not protect people from, protect them by having a tariff around the country so that foreign goods are expensive? Why not do that, as this incredible fool we have as a president in the United States wants to do? Fortunately, Donald Trump is stupid and lazy. If he was as smart as Putin and as energetic as Erdogan, the United States would be in real trouble, but fortunately he's not. But okay, we're going to have tariffs, and that's going to protect Spanish manufacturers. And this was a common idea of governments for a long time. First, little local governments like Barcelona, they'd have a tariff barrier around Barcelona in the Middle Ages. They did. And you'd have to pay money to come in to sell stuff in Barcelona, and now around the whole country. It's called mercantilism. And the trouble is that you're protecting people, one group of people, by hurting other people. That's the problem. It's like redistribution. In fact, it's not like redistribution, it is redistribution. People who want to buy an automobile in France are forbidden to, because there isn't anymore, but there once was a domestic Spanish automobile industry, I think, but suppose there was. And then you'd protect the domestic thing, and then that would give jobs. But of course, just like Donald Trump's steel tariff, it kills jobs in steel-using industries. In fact, it's been calculated that it's about 10 to 1. So you don't end up protecting the people, right? You protect this little group as against that. You've just, let me give another example. Uber, the ride service, has just opened in Barcelona. What was it, a couple of weeks ago? We waited half an hour to get an official taxi at my hotel. It took forever. It was a complete mess. Maybe it was more than half an hour. It was terrible. The official taxis worldwide are protected by the government. If you try to run a taxi and don't have a taxi license, you go to jail. The government brings its fist in, says, no, only licensed taxi drivers can do it. And this is a serious problem in Spain and the United States. There are over 1,000 occupations in the United States that require a government license. Here's one. This is completely crazy. Hair braiding, which is common among the African American community. Hair braiding takes a long time. You braid your hair and then you don't have to worry about it. Well, that's nice, except to get to be a hair braider, you've got to go to the hair braid school that's conveniently connected with the politicians and learn to do hair braiding, which every African-American woman already knows anyway. Another shocking example, and I could give a zillion of these. In the state of Tennessee, in the United States, if you want to open a moving company, furniture moving, right? 2 guys and a truck, right? 2 guys and a truck. In Tennessee, you've got to get the permission of the existing moving companies. Now, how do you think the existing moving companies feel about new entrants to the moving industry? No, wait, we don't need any more movers. We're doing just fine with our moving. It's completely crazy. Hospitals are the same way in the United States. To open a hospital, you need a certificate of need. Who decides whether you need a new hospital? Guess what? The other hospitals. So these kinds of protections, and I got to keep ahead of my nose here, industrial policy, as it's called in the United States, this business of the government doing stuff. Actually, I think the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, is a very good example of how badly governments do things. NASA, I agree that the time of the astronauts going to the moon and so on was glorious, and some things that governments and nations do should be glorious. I don't mind that. But NASA keeps trying to put mirrors or telescopes in space, and it doesn't seem to be very good at it. The current telescope they're going to have, which can look back very far in time because you can get more and more galaxies, started out as a price of $1 billion and now is $8 billion. And it's still not working. Whereas, what's his name? Musk, is that his name? Musk, he's determined to make space travel something many of us can do, sort of like a bus. You just hop on your space vehicle and you go to the moon if you want. And he's going to make it cheap because he's got every commercial incentive to do so. I'm not making the case that economics is the only good thing to talk about or that there's no role for government, as I said. There's a role for government. But our governments are much too big. In 1914 or 1910, I forget which, if you added up all levels of government, state, local, and federal in the United States, they spent about 7.5% of national income. Modern governments, my own included, well, the United States is rather low in the league tables of this. It's only 33% or something, all levels of government. But that's compared with 7.5 100 years ago. And France, it's over 50%. Henry Kissinger, whom you Spaniards correctly identify as a war criminal, if he lands in Spain, he will be arrested. Go to it. Let's hope his airplane runs out of fuel over Spain and he has to go to Madrid and they grab him. But anyway, he's a very funny guy. He's very, very, very witty. And he said that France is the only successful communist country. So that's my story. We got here. Now look, if there's one thing you should get from this talk, it's how big the change has been since 1800. In 1800 worldwide, the average human being in modern prices, in prices that you'd pay in Barcelona right now, earned $3 a day. Earned and spent, consumed, made $3 a day, okay? Now, that's not a crazy figure because there are still many countries in the world falling in percentage. There are less and less of them, but still there are countries like Chad and so on that it's $3 a day. Now, income in Barcelona, to be particular, is on the order of $110 a day. Same prices. This is correcting for inflation. It's got nothing to do with inflation. That's the change. $3 to 110. That's transformative. Now, I'm not saying that economics is, and stuff and goods and services is all you need in life. But indeed, what we're doing right now is higher stuff. I look around the room. I don't see any Habsburg chins. I take it everyone here is the descendant of a peasant. I know I am. Irish, Norwegian, English. We were unspeakably poor a couple of centuries ago. Now here we are discussing world history of an evening in Barcelona. Wow, what a change. So it's that we're trying to explain. How we got rich and how other countries can get rich. It'd be much harder for me to make the case I'm making that liberalism is also the way forward if it hadn't been for China and India. China in 1978 and India in 1991 allowed people to have a go. It was not in either case centrally done, but what happened is that economically speaking, China and India became liberal. And their growth rates, which under socialism had been 1% a year per capita, jumped up to anywhere from 7 to 12% per year in real terms. Now, 7 to 12% per year in real terms solves a lot of social problems. Not tomorrow, but very quickly. If you've got, let's take just 7.2% economic growth, which has been what India has been doing since 1991, your income will double every 10 years. So in 20 years, do the math, it quadruples, goes up by a factor of 4. So in a generation, it increases by a factor of 4. In 2 generations, increases by a factor of 16, isn't it? Yeah, 16. So that's the way forward for India and China. And it's the way forward for all of us. It's the way forward for countries I love and know, Brazil and South Africa. They haven't done it, but they should. And it's the way forward for Spain and the United States. Liberalism has the merit of giving people freedom, which we modern people, regardless of our politics, we all think that's good, right? It gives them freedom. But it also makes them rich, which is very nice. So that's my theme. Thank you very much. I have to practice my court curtsy for my coming Nobel Prize. Fat chance. Okay. We got a few minutes to talk about it. Yeah, go ahead.
Why was ideas and not institutions, a la Simoglu, North, and others?
Well, let me just answer that, and then I'll... No, wait. I'm going to do it with this one. Because you got to have the idea of reinforced concrete to do it. And as long as you've got very widely spread institutions, the rule of law, for example, and not arbitrary behavior by the government, then you're going to be able to implement the ideas with investment. But investment is a result, not the cause. Pouring capital into a country doesn't work. You have to have ideas. Now, my example always, not always, but sometimes is China. If you were a betting person in 1492 and you knew that there was going to be a great enrichment in a few hundred years, you would have bet the farm, as we say in the United States, on China. China had the rule of law. China had very large internal markets. China had foreign trade, but especially internal markets. It had peace for 100 years at a time. So that's why. Go ahead, what's the second one?
Why do we have to be optimistic about the future?
We do.
Take Spain. There's no one politician, no one thinker that is liberal in the right way.
Yeah.
I guess that we are all the liberals in Barcelona.
There's
there's nobody else out there. Why do we have to be optimistic?
Well, because a lot of the values that we liberals are self-conscious about are in fact agreed to by large parts of the population. If you want to open a hairdressing salon and the government says no, there's no need for a hairdressing salon in this neighborhood, you're going to get indignant. Whereas in the Middle Ages or early modern times, you would just assume that, well, it's the other hairdressing salons that are stopping me. And what we all agree, I mean, anyone, you don't have to be a liberal to think it's pretty stupid, this Tennessee law about moving companies. You don't have to be cynical or think governments are evil or something, but that's a really stupid law. And there are thousands of them. So I think that's it. But I am puzzled why in Europe generally there are very few liberals. In the north and the south, anywhere you go, there are very few of them. And I think they're just misled. And I'm here to help them understand their own values. I'm a preacher. I can't force them to be liberals. I don't want to. I want to sweet talk them. So I'm going to have them buy my books and read them carefully. Come to the one true opinion. Yes, dear.
Yeah, I have a question. When you put the example of when you gave the example of this law that didn't allow
the
to
crazy
start a
one.
moving company
Yeah, yeah.
unless the other moving companies, or when it comes to hospital.
Sure.
I mean, what benefit the state has from this? Like, aren't the companies the ones who want that? Like, are those companies who prevent other people, liberal people, to create their own businesses on the same sector as them, not being very liberal? Like, could it be that the companies sometimes are the ones who push the state or
here's
reach any agreement with the state in order to prevent other people to
Absolutely.
enter these markets that supposedly have their own rules?
We're in complete agreement there. Seizing the state, as the movers of Tennessee apparently have, and getting the state to enforce your monopoly is really a good deal. We haven't got one in economics. Anyone in this room can hang out an advertisement, economic advice. Anyone here. But if you do the same as a doctor or a lawyer, you're going to go to jail. And so it's enforcing of monopolies. We're in agreement. And of course, self-interested people will try to get a monopoly. The taxi companies in Barcelona are a monopoly. And they don't want, if they can stop Uber, they will, with violence if necessary. So, yeah, you're right.
So you're actually trashing the state for a mistake that the companies, in their own self-interest, are doing?
I didn't crush, they don't crush the state, they use the state. They pay politicians. I mean, this is commonplace. You don't have to be particularly cynical to know that it's very likely in Tennessee, for example.
Then how you can believe blindly on the laws
How can you
of
what?
the free? How can you believe in the laws of the free market if the ones who are benefiting from it are actually perverting these laws?
Of course they are, but it's via the state. If the state were smaller, if the state was governed, as to a large extent in many countries of Northern Europe especially, and Southern, I said that Spain had a very liberal constitution in 1820 and so on. If there's an ideology of liberalism generally in the population, people won't tolerate that. They won't let enterprises try to form monopolies. The only successful long-term monopolies are state-supported. So we want a small state that's not worth capturing, a state that's constrained to not do protection or industrial policy, to stop competition with protection, so-called protection, or to engage in projects that private interests want but are not good for the country as a whole. So I'm not an anarchist, but I am in favor of a smaller government than these grotesquely large governments we have. I want them to be competent at the few things they should be doing and not trying to be economic planners or whatever. So, I urge you to read my books, or at least buy them. And if you put them under your pillow every night, after a while, believe me, dear, you'll become a liberal. Who else?
Oh, thank you for your speech. And during your speech, you mentioned many cases of inventions and innovations, and it came to my mind the David Land's book, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations.
Yeah.
Did you know him? Have you read that book?
Which one? You mean David Landis? Who is
David Land's The Wealth and Poverty of Nations.
Who is it again?
He's an historian.
Yeah, I know, but who is he again? What's his name?
David Landis.
David Landis, yeah, he's an old friend. He was an old friend of mine.
Yeah.
First part of my career, I spent attacking him. because he said that entrepreneurship was the key to a capitalist economy. And I've spent the second half of my career agreeing with him.
I think
So +1 minus 1 equals 0, I suppose. But no, I did a review of that book, which you can find on my webpage, which is deirdremccloskey.org. And I praised it, and then I criticized it.
I think it's a brilliant book.
Well, here's what's wrong with it. There are a lot of things that are right. But what David believed was that culture was everything. He said that. His problem was that he didn't realize that culture changes. And sometimes it can change remarkably quickly. I mean, take a look at gay marriage, to take one instance. 30 years ago in Spain or the United States, gay marriage was just a pipe dream. No one would believe it would ever happen. And then rather quickly in both countries, it became, oh, well, gay marriage, okay, what's the big deal, right? So that's what's wrong with his argument. He's not thinking about how cultures change. So he says, the Portuguese, they're hopeless. In 1800, they had the lowest literacy rate in Europe. Practically no one in Portugal could read. I mean, it was just awful. Well, look at Portugal now. Something changed. And David's so interested in showing that, culture matters. I mean, I think culture matters, but I think it's available for preaching, or it's available for political agitation.
But he was in favor of entrepreneurship and also market economy.
Yeah, he was. David was a conservative, not a liberal. Yeah. And he believed, as conservatives often do, at this, the Spaniards, they'll never develop because, they're Spaniards. I don't think that's really works. Because, look, when I was young, we used to say, the Indians, South Asians, they're never going to develop. After all, most of them are Hindus, and the others are Muslims. I mean, come on, that's hopeless. And yet, India is growing at 7% per year per capita. The Chinese, well, they're Confucians, and they're communists too. And what a combination. They're never going to grow. This is what we said in the 1960s. People like Myrdal, the Swede, said, he wrote a book called The Asian, what was it called? Not The Asian Dilemma. I'm mixing up two titles. But anyway, he said Asia was hopeless. Asia's never going to develop. Well, look at it. It did. So apparently culture, the Indians are going to go on playing cricket rather well, praying to the son of Gari and so forth. They're going to go on being Indian. They're going to eat Indian food for the next 200 years, but with a liberal economic policy, they've been able to have an extraordinary growth rate. So I think David was wrong. I think sociological and political attitudes about entrepreneurs and business people, that's what really matters.
And what about Douglas North?
Douglas North was a friend of mine. I wrote the citation, most of the citation he got for his Nobel Prize in 1993, I wrote. So, I admire Doug. And in this book, you'll see it says institutions are not the cause either. Because, and I go into some detail in both volume 2 and this volume 3 of why Doug North is wrong. So if you want to find out the details, the gory details, his basic problem is that he thinks rule of law came suddenly to England in 1689. And this is ridiculous. And then there was this long, mysterious lag before it had an economic effect. So, Doug, there's a somewhat cruel remark about Doug. He never answered his critics for any of his hypotheses because he was too busy making a new mistake. It's pretty nasty, you'll admit. Can I have a we've had, yeah.
Okay. So if I understand it correctly, you're making the scientific point that
Yeah.
a couple centuries ago, ideas changed, like culture changed.
Yeah.
So then, do you think that currently, like the cultural battle is won, and we just need to focus on institutions saying, just get out of the way, and people will make a worthwhile living? Or should we, as liberals, insist also in the ethical realm, saying, no, people deserve our dignity and
I think we need to work on first on the ethical part. And my first book in this series was called The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce, which I tried to show that economic life is not necessarily corrupting. And I think we have to stop using this kind of Chicago school, oh, you get rich. That's not good enough. If getting rich the way we are loses our immortal soul, if it corrupts us, as it says in the Bible, what good is it to gain the earth if you lose your immortal soul? I absolutely agree with this as a Christian and as a sensible person, that if you're corrupted, actually, again, I have to use Donald Trump as an example, because imagine a nation composed of Donald Trumps. Believe me, the United States is not that way. But suppose it was. That he is a hopelessly corrupt person, not just financially, but intellectually, spiritually, sexually, every way you can name. He's just corrupt. He is a slave to his impulses, a slave to his appetites, completely. And if that was what capitalism did to people, I would be a socialist. Unfortunately, there's a good deal of evidence that socialism doesn't make people good either. 70 years under socialism in the Soviet Union produced envious, sneaky, cheating people. And they still really haven't gotten over it. So no, we have to stop saying, oh, we're just going to do positive economics. We're just going to talk about how big national income is. It's very important, and I've emphasized it. But we've also got to ask ourselves, is a so-called capitalist society good for us? And I think it is. I think that the pursuit of the transcendent, even the pursuit of the transcendent by my socialist friends who want to help the poor. Now, I'm here to tell them that they do it wrong, but on the other hand, they're, in a saintly way, they're trying to help the poor of the world, and I think that's a great and honorable thing for them to try to do. It's just they do it wrong. So as we get rich, we're able to deal with a variety of transcendent purposes. Intellectual, artistic, Barcelona Football Club, whatever it is. I was here once when Barcelona was here in Barcelona when on the night of a match between Real and Barcelona, and the town was just hopping. Wow.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I'd like to hear what are your thoughts on the way forward in what refers to the impact of technology on the privacy of citizens. Well, I just read in the news that in China, now in WeChat, in this app, you're going to have what they call social credits for good citizenship based on your behavior, no?
Yeah.
Is this what is waiting for us right around the corner?
Well, we've got to resist that. I think that this attempt to set up a 1984 type state in China, which is what this guy Xi is trying to do, is going to be self-correcting. It's going to result in Smith's, the hero of 1984 was named Smith. It's going to result in people rebelling, I think. Let's hope to God, because if Putin and Erdogan and Orban and Trump, but unfortunately he's stupid and lazy, if they get hold of these techniques, and actually Trump did in the election, then we're doomed. But I'm an optimist. People like to hear pessimism. They like to hear that the sky is falling, that the end is near. And it hasn't been near for 2 centuries. Even in the Great Depression, we got out of it. First and Second World War, we got through them. The Spanish Civil War, you're still dealing with it, but there it is. We got over it, and now Spain is a prosperous and free country. So I'm optimistic, not just because I'm a fool or something. I may be a fool, but I have reason to believe. Why would it suddenly go the other way? I don't think technology can do that.
Yeah, it's working now, I think. I'm actually a social democrat spying on you to see what liberals are thinking. We're not doing that hot either right now in Spain. And I was wondering what you thought about the fact that income inequality has grown both in the US and in the EU over the last 20 or 30 years. Is this a phenomenon that should worry us or not? Is it a natural phenomenon?
Well, I wrote a long review, a 50-page review of Piketty. You can find that on my website, too. And I didn't look at the other reviews. I wanted to give him a fair hearing. I was willing to be convinced if he could show it. And I admire the energy and the seriousness of his work. So I'm not contemptuous of him. Just because he's a man of the left, I want to listen to him. And I listened to him, and I found that he was wrong. For instance, it's not actually true that inequality has increased. Now, I know you all believe it because you're told every night on the TV, inequality, inequality, inequality. That's because our income figures don't include the quality of goods. Quality of goods has affected poor people much more than rich people. And it's not a small effect. There was a famous commission in the United States in the 1990s that reckoned it was about 1% a year that we missed because we weren't including quality. Take out your smartphones. Look at them. Once you had the clamshell things that opened and you could make a phone call. That's all you could do. Who buys a torch or what do we call it in the United States?
Flashlight.
A flashlight. Who has it anymore? You don't need it. It's in your cell phone. Who has a recording machine? What are you talking about? It's in your cell phone. Who has a computer that is specialized in doing email? Why bother? It's in your cell phone. I mean, when the cell phones finally get so that they clean up the dishes at night, then I'll be completely satisfied. But to talk about the clamshell phone as being the same thing as an advanced smartphone is just crazy. But I've spoken twice to the head of the Consumer Price Index of the United States, and she admits this. It's a real serious problem. And it hasn't happened in most of Europe, this so-called increase in inequality. And indeed, in the United States, Canada, and Britain, where it is supposed to have happened. Those are the only ones that he claims in his book, by the way. All the rest is about the future, how it's going to get worse because of his theories about capitalism. It's a brave book, but it's wrong, wrong, wrong. And this, look, equality is not a sensible ethical purpose. Relieving poverty really is. And the advantage of relieving poverty, making that our social objective, is that we know how to do it. Whereas, look, there are people in this room who are smarter than I am. Hans here is smarter, Bodil is too. They're smarter than I am. How are we going to achieve equality? Well, let's see. Let's drive nails into Hans's head until he's as stupid as I am. That would create equality. Now, we don't want that kind of equality. We want Hans's brilliant brain to be used for the benefit of us all. And it essentially is. So, equality is a very dubious ethical principle. I mean, if you want to build your ethical universe on the sin of envy, oh, I'm envious of Liliane Bettencourt, the heiress to the L'Oreal fortune, and I hate her. That's what Piketty says. I don't care if Liliane Bettencourt has a bunch of yachts. She's a jerk, or was a jerk. I think she died. But, she's a terrible person. I'm willing to sneer at her. But I'm not willing to intervene in the cosmetics industry to make her poorer, to help other people. I think people have more dignity, more self-assurance if they can get jobs. And they get jobs if the government keeps out of the economy. Government gets into the economy, jobs disappear. Take the minimum wage, which we have. I don't know if you have one in Spain. Yeah, but we do in the United States. I talk to my economist colleagues on the left, and they say, oh, the minimum wage, you've got to raise the minimum wage. This will make the poor better off. No, it won't. It'll make some of the poor better off. In South Africa, there's a high minimum wage. The Congress of South African Trade Unions wants it. And since they are an important part of the government coalition, they get it. This means that people who are not worth the minimum wage, according to business people, don't get any jobs at all. Same thing with French and other job protection schemes. You can't be fired except for cause. Well, in South Africa, just as an extreme example, you can't be fired from a job unless you're convicted in a court of law of stealing from your boss or not showing up at all. You have to be convicted in a court of law or you cannot be fired. Now, if you were in business, would you hire anyone under those terms? I know I wouldn't, because who knows? He might turn out to be a terrible thief. So over and over and over again, these interventions that actually the minimum wage is an interesting one because it was introduced first in Australia and then the United States in the 1890s and the 1900s, early 1900s. And its purpose was to screw immigrants. That was its chief purpose, to keep the immigrants out of the labor force entirely. These terrible Irish, but by then Polish and Italian, we don't want any of them. We don't want them to have a job at all. And by the way, we don't want blacks, Hispanics, and women to have a job. We just want white Anglo-Saxon men to have jobs. And it worked. Great.
Okay, thank you so much for your interesting and inspiring talk. I think if it's the ideas that matters, you should definitely keep recommending buying and spreading the ideas of this Bourgeois trilogy. And thank you so much for coming. I would also like to invite you on the next April 25th, we're having a conference by Dr. Jamie White, the research director of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and he's going to be talking about the transition from the welfare state to the welfare society. So, thank you.